I'm continuing my look at the games of Anatoly Karpov, former world champion, and focusing in particular on his attacking play. Now that's not something we normally associate Karpov with, but I hope to demonstrate that he is a great attacker as well as a great strategist. I'm looking at the game between Karpov and Korchnoi from the Baguio match, the Baguio World Championship match in 1978, and this was game 8. Of course, after Fischer's withdrawal from the chess scene in post-1972, the 1970s was really dominated by the rivalry between Karpov and Korchnoi. And so this is from their World Championship match in 1978. They'd had 7 draws in the first 7 games. This was game 8. Karpov with the white pieces, and Korchnoi plays a real favourite of his, and he played it many times in this match. The open Spanish. This has rather gone out of fashion recently, I suspect, because a lot of these sharp lines can be very well analysed by computers, and I don't think they're completely reliable for black. It's risky variation, although there's a dynamic imbalance here. You can see that white has a very nice kingside pawn majority, and that pawn on e5 is a kind of spearhead. Often white is able to attack on the king side. Sometimes if this knight manages to move using the f pawn as well, and that pawn duo of f4 and e5 can be very powerful. And if this bishop drops back as well, then white's pieces start to look dangerous. On the other hand, black has securely blockaded that e pawn, and if he's able to get his c pawn moving eventually, then he has a nice majority of pawns in the centre and on the queen side. But of course those 2 knights are in the way at the moment. But it's this kind of imbalanced position, of course, is the kind of thing that Korchnoi likes very much. Now the normal moves here are, well, d4 is probably the most popular, bishop g4 also possible, and bishop e7. Korchnoi has played all these moves. But he played g6, and apparently this was a spur-of-the-moment decision. It's quite extraordinary. It's a dangerous move, a provocative move, typical for Korchnoi. White has already castled. Black's king is in the middle of the board, and yet black is taking another move to bring his bishop into play and then get castled. Now, given all the time in the world, then this possibly a very nice idea, because that pawn would block a bishop coming to c2, and the bishop on g7 also threatens the pawn on e5. But time is the issue here. It's very time consuming. Now, given what we know about Karpov, a great strategist, one might expect something like bishop c2, and then this typical idea in the open Spanish, knight b3, freeing the bishop to come to f4 or g5, and I think this is a completely legitimate way of playing for white. But instead Karpov played a far sharper continuation, found a very sharp idea. First of all, queen e2. Well, that is opposite black's king. Doesn't look significant at the moment, but just wait. And after bishop g7, he'd planned this move, knight d4. Well, let's have a look at what happens if this is exchanged off. You can see this is actually very typical for the open Spanish. This is your dream position for white. White controls the c5 square and has a potentially mobile pawn majority on the king side, and those dark squares around the king could well be weak, but strategically white is, well, close to winning here actually. So yeah, that's not really on. One could play solidly and play something like this, but I guess we could exchange and bring the knight to f3. And somehow this looks quite pleasant for white. You know, perhaps bishop g5 is coming as well. So Korchnoi picked up the gauntlet. He was up for the challenge. Knight takes e5. He likes to take hot pawns. And now we see Karpov's idea. f4. Attacking the knight moves away, and f5. So Karpov, that's why he put the queen on e2. There's a pin here. So he's cracking open the f-file straight away. He's launching an attack on black's king, which hasn't castled. If the king were to castle here, this would probably be fatal. White's bishops are directed towards the king. The king's exposed. Those dart squares are awful. There's a little tactical problem here for black. If black tries to block out the bishop, then that can simply be taken, and then queen e5 is very powerful. Obviously f6 would lose the bishop on e6, and if king g8, then boom, that's the end of that. So castling not possible here, but that makes life very awkward for black. Korchnoi chose rook g8. Well, he's hoping that he might be able to get some play on the g file. Let's see what happens. Karpov exchanged off and dropped the bishop back to c2. Well, let's just have a look what happens, for example, if white lunges in. Now, at the first glance, this perhaps looks good, threatening these two. But after this gives an idea of black's defensive resources. Here, queen d5 saves black. There's a threat to g2, and, well, the endgame would be probably about equal. Of course, the queen could drop back, but, well, something like this is far from clear. Black certainly has activity here. But Karpov wasn't tempted by this. He simply dropped the bishop back. So, you know, white is just threatening to bring his queen's bishop into play, and then rook in the middle, and then black's king stuck in the middle is a big problem. Well, Korchnoi shut one of the bishops out, but then came a very powerful move, no doubt planned in advance by Karpov. Bishop h6, excellent move. So the idea is that after exchanging off, then just rook d1 is going to recover the pawn after exchanging bishop for knight, and, well, this attack continues against the king. It's just too dangerous. But Korchnoi is in huge trouble now. Well, he played bishop f8. I mean, it's really a desperate idea going backwards. Karpov anyway continued with rook d1. You can see, well, with all white's pieces in play, and black's rooks fatally split, the king's still in the middle. In practice, this is hopeless. Okay, Korchnoi is desperately wanting to escape to the queen side, but of course that's not going to be possible. And bishop takes bishop. I mean, in a sense, Karpov doesn't need to do anything very special now. He just needs to bring his pieces over towards in the direction of black's king. Well, if rook takes check and queen f2 is just hopeless. Queen f6 is coming. And if king takes bishop, knight d4 attacks both of those. Fatal pin. Queen b6, check was tried, and now king takes. Queen f3. Okay, so we're just lining up, barreling up against the king. And Karpov does so with tempo. Rook came to e8, and now knight h6. Threatening rook as well as queen f7, mate. And now rook d7. Same idea. If this rook is taken, this is very neat, then it's mate with this queen sacrifice. So f7 is threatened. Korchnoi made room for his king, but this is absolutely hopeless, and knight takes f7 is the cleanest kill in the position. This is how the game ended. Bishop takes rook, and now knight d8 check forces mate. If, for example, king e7, then queen f8 is mate. Well, a very efficient attack by Karpov, I would say, and I think to be able to spot this idea with queen e2 and knight d4 right from the off, when he was, well, I'm sure he hadn't seen g6 before, I think is very nice indeed. Karpov really took the game by the scruff of the neck. If you're interested in looking at some of Karpov's more strategic play, then I would recommend my PowerPlay DVDs number 5 and 6, where I concentrate on pawn structures and play against pawn structures and weak pawns, and I have several examples by Karpov, and if you're interested in those, then you can download them or buy a physical DVD from the ChessBase shop, link provided after this clip is over.